Welcome to the Cashflow Ninja, the podcast sharing how to create and grow income streams and manage, multiply, and protect your wealth in the new economy. Are you tired of trading your time for money? Do you desire freedom today instead of retirement in 10, 20, or 30 years? I'm MC Laubscher, and this is the Cashflow Ninja. Hello, Cashflow Ninjas. MC Laubscher here, and welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Ninja. I have a great show for you today. In today's show, we're going to look at how you can underwrite multifamily real estate deals in the current market environment. Joining me on the show today is my friend Reed Goossens. Reed is a real estate entrepreneur and founder of RSN Property Group. As a native Aussie, Reed moved to the US to pursue his career. He's a qualified structural engineer and project manager by trade. And Reed has been involved with very large-scale commercial construction and real estate development projects worth over $500 million since 2007 in Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US. Projects that include the London 2012 Olympic Games. And after he gained valuable experience working in the engineering and construction industry, Reed decided to pursue his passion for real estate development and investing by starting RSN Property Group. In recent years, Reed has developed his personal portfolio of solid cash flow investment properties. He's currently, he currently has a portfolio of over $100 million under management. And he believes now is the time to enhance and utilize the power of syndication investing to purchase apartment communities across the U.S. Reed's commitment to the development of a structured approach to researching, acquiring, and managing investments provides the basis for RSN's sound operating system. If you're interested in joining our investors group, you could go to cashflowninja.com/investors group and fill out an application form and or email me at info@cashflowninja.com to start the discussion to see if you're a good fit for our group. And if you're in the Philadelphia, Bucks County, and Southern New Jersey area, we are hosting a live investors meetup event every month in Newtown, Pennsylvania. For more information on the monthly event and information on how to join us at our next live event, you could go to cashflowninja.com/events. MC Laubscher here, the host of the Cashflow Ninja podcast and also the president and chief wealth and investment strategist of Producers Wealth, where we help our clients integrate cash flow banking, also known as infinite banking, with their business and investments. If you're interested in learning more about how we create strategies that integrate cash flow banking and investments to turbocharge them, you can access a video series at yourownbankingsystem.com. That's yourownbankingsystem.com. Reed, welcome back to the show.
G'day, mate. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, great to have you back on. Always a pleasure to speak with you. So excited for all the stuff that we're going to jump into today and discuss. Reed, I figured a good place for us to start is if you just want to share a little bit about yourself and your background for new listeners and for listeners that might be familiar with you, tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, so background in a nutshell, moved to the United States back in early 2012, moved here for two reasons. I loved New York City, but I also was in love with an American girl. She's now my wife. Moved here without a job, just hit the pavement streets of New York until I found a job. My background's in structural engineering. I had many years of experience in ground-up construction, retail, multifamily, infrastructure. And really just, I had 3 months, a very small time window to get someone to say yes. And that old saying that Tony Robbins says, one yes can change your life. And that essentially what happened. I got a job within, I think, 2 weeks of being fresh off the boat. I was at my first RIA meeting in New York City. And I'd been attending some stuff back in Australia, sort of being a bit self-taught, picked up the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad a couple of years prior to 2012. And within 6 months, had purchased my first asset, and it was a $38,000 duplex in upstate New York. And I was gobsmacked at the barriers to entry here in the United States. It was just so much lower compared to what they are back in Aussie. And I had to pay obviously all cash for it because I didn't have a credit score. I didn't even know what a credit score was. I had to build build a reputation with my local bank. It was all these things that I was having to learn while still doing a job. Bought a couple of little duplexes, learned really quickly the lesson of Section 8 and why not to do it. I know some people are successful with it, but just on small scale multifamily, it wasn't really working for me. Flipped a few houses in Philadelphia a couple of years later. And then in 2013, got involved in syndication. And since then, over the last, 6 years, I now personally manage over $100 million worth of multifamily real estate. As I said, I came to this country. I didn't go to school here. I don't have any family here besides my wife's family, obviously. And I had to make it happen. And in 6 years, going from literally no personal investing experience besides my structural engineering experience on terms of getting deals done, to now we were under management, I think 110 or 120 million dollars worth of multifamily, and looking to continue to grow that. And now I'm the co-founder of Wildhorn Capital, and really enjoying my time. I also have a podcast, and we can get into that as well, and a bit around a book that I've just written. So that's in a nutshell, elevator pitch for those people who may not know anything about me.
No, awesome. One thing that comes to mind, one of the things that you said too, was you were godsmacked about the level of the barrier to entry in the real estate market when you came here. And it's always interesting to hear other immigrants and their perspectives, because one of the things that I always touch on is when I came here from South Africa the first thing that struck me was the upward mobility available to anyone. It's like, listen, you don't care where you're from, what color you are, what language you speak, or what your past is, or if you failed or anything like that. If you can create something of value that others seek, and there's an exchange, the sky's the limit, right?
Yep.
What are some of your other comments about being an immigrant and the immigrant? I wouldn't say it's a competitive advantage, but in some ways it definitely could be, coming to a country like the United States as an immigrant.
Yeah, look, I've had, even on my show, I've talked to a lot of immigrant entrepreneurs. I definitely think in places like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, LA, those sort of what's called tier one cities, those cities are essentially founded on immigration. And you go to New York City and it's a melting pot of different cultures. But maybe in the South, it's not as... I interviewed a guy the other day, and he got a really interesting perspective on it, Aussie guy, and it was sort of like his perspective of it was, everyone loves to have a beer with an Aussie, but when it comes to business, all the Aussies need to leave the room. But yet I've had the complete opposite experience in, say, New York City. So it really thinks where you are in the United States will really dictate. Maybe the old boys club in the South, where, in New York City and in San Francisco and stuff like that, it's really just, grind until, you're making it happen. And there is something to be said about when your back's against the wall. And I remember when I first moved here, I only had a very short window of time before my visa ran up in order to get that job. So, I was doing everything I could. This whole submitting your resume online to Indeed.com, it just doesn't work in this virtual age. And I was literally going with my portfolio and knocking on engineering doors and firms and saying, hey, give me a job. And I was specifically looking for firms with less than 30 people because they didn't then have HR, and HR would be a person who looks at a HR resume. No offense to people in HR, but because I wasn't from an American school and blah, 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 they would have, thrown it out the window. So I had to do something different to get in front of the right people. And as I said, it takes one yes. And I remember creating a list of all the engineering firms in New York City, a double-sided paper on A4 piece of paper, and just kept going through it. And I think I got to firm 20 before I got an interview, and then firms 20, 25, and 30 all gave me interviews, and I think one of them gave me a job out of that. So it was sort of like that hustle. And I remember walking into one place and they're going, what the hell are you doing here? I was like, I'm here for a job. And I had this huge binder of, projects that I'd worked on as an engineer, and the Olympic Games. And they were like, I'll interview you now. They were just so taken aback by that someone would actually walk in and say, hey, I want a job. I also walked into a lot of places and they said, get the hell out. But it was also that the grind. And I noticed everyone else you had to be different, right? Being better. What's that saying? Different is better than being better. So you have to be different in today's world, and just being better doesn't do anything anymore. You got to be different. You got to stand out, and that was what I took a different approach and just door knocked and guerrilla marketing, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's touch on this: investing in the U.S., the ultimate guide to U.S. real estate. congrats on getting this book published. This I've got to say, like I've told you even before it started, I'm very impressed. This is very well done. There's so much value and info in this book. I would highly recommend you check out Reed's book. Reed, a couple of questions when I look at this book. There's probably a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that gone into this. What were some of the greatest learning experiences of the book? What were some of the things that the expectations that you had going in saying, well, this is maybe how it's going to be? And what were some of the things that completely threw you off that you never expected? And then maybe touch on some of the lessons that you learned. Yeah.
Well, I think just for all your listeners out there, rewind it just a little bit, like just take it into perspective for a little bit. I'm a structural engineer. I'm very black and white brain. I don't have any gray. And when I first came to the United States and learned that I had to be successful at syndication, I had to start this brand and this podcast and what's, all this stuff, content. I was like, what the hell is all that crap? I didn't know, but I learned. And through creating my own podcast, which is called Investing in the US, and I've had you on before many times, but through that, I was able to create other sources of content, to put in a book form. So really, that book is all the best bits of my podcast in a book form, sort of laid out in a sequential order and tied my story, my narrative in and around each chapter. One of the biggest things I learned was that when, being an engineer, very mathematical brain, my first draft was very textbook. It was, meaning it read like a textbook. It was boring. My editor was like, you've got to go get some help with this. And I had to bring in, someone to help me sort of not co-write it, but just add the bit of not say fluff around it, but just more engaging. And that was something I had to learn very quickly, being an editor, because I'm not naturally a writer. My parents actually cursed me by calling me Reed. I had to, learn to read and write, growing up and obviously like everyone, but I had to spend more emphasis on that because I just don't enjoy writing as much as I enjoy speaking or being on camera. So that was really it was probably 3 years in the making, that book, between the first draft and the 20th draft we ended up going with. And I think it was still sort of, 90-10 baked in terms of, it wasn't quite there, but it was, let's get it out. It's been, it was one of those projects that you had to pull it over the line, and I'm really happy that I've done it. But I'm not rushing back to do another one anytime soon. Yes, at least without not a bunch of help.
Yeah, absolutely. So for audiences, for our audience and listeners and so forth, there's a lot of fantastic info in here for foreign investors, but there's also a lot of great meaty stuff for folks investing in the U.S.
Yep.
and currently in the U.S. What are some of the other things, if you want to touch on a couple of topics that folks might be interested, that's included in the book?
I think, look, in general, it's what I said a little bit earlier. It's the perspective. You touched on this as you'd come to from South Africa, me coming from Australia, seeing the barriers to entry. That international perspective gives us folk and the book personally, when I can go and look at a market where there's 4, 5, 6% cap rates and everyone's saying, oh, it's so compressed historically, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm comparing it to markets where cap rates are 1% and 2%, where lending in Australia is, from a commercial point of view, there's no such thing as non-recourse. There's no such thing as government agency, Freddie, Fannie type of lending. We have maybe 4 major lending institutions in Australia. So it's very, very, there's not a lot of free markets, so to speak. Like here in the States, you have just, probably 2,000 or 3,000 different types of lending opportunities. So that perspective means that I can see maybe deals in a little bit different light. And again, the barriers to entry, coming a lot down. Going out and paying $38,000 for a duplex was just like, you would never find that in Australia. So that is, I think, is really important. It gives it maybe somewhat a fresh look at the US market. I was intentional about writing it that it's for both folks, both international and domestic. And there's actually really only one chapter in there that's about international, just sort of getting set up. The rest of it, you could be just a newbie, just wanting to get started and understand how to find a market, how to build your team, what is syndication, how do you value a commercial asset, just from sort of back of the napkin type of view, and really giving my sort of step-by-step how I stumbled through it, because again, I'm self-taught. Most people in this industry are. And, it's about, meeting the right people and making those, small little mistakes early to then learn and grow as an entrepreneur and a business owner, to then, hopefully get all my thoughts and ideas into a book so, I can help someone avoid those mistakes in the future.
You're listening to the Cashflow Ninja, the show helping people all over the world create monthly cash flow and achieve freedom today, not in 10, 20, 30, and or 40 years. This is the show where cash is not king, but cash flow is king. We will be right back after a word from our sponsors. My friend Dave Zook says you can be conventional or you can be wealthy. Pick one. Dave and his team at The Real Asset Investor have syndicated many successful real estate and ATM projects over the last decade. Now his team has an exclusive opportunity for investors in the coal space. Do you want to be part of an energy project that takes conventional coal and cleans it up by extracting liquids while releasing almost zero emissions? The sale of these liquids can produce strong double-digit cash flow and aggressive tax benefits against ordinary income, all while using America's #1 most plentiful resource in a responsible, efficient manner. Now that's non-conventional. For more information on this exclusive opportunity, you can visit therealassetinvestor.com or contact the Real Asset Investor team at info@therealassetinvestor.com.
Are you having a hard time finding great investment properties? Unfortunately, the best deals are rarely found locally. Successful investing begins with the right properties in the right markets. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best deals across the United States. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly cash flow. Learn how to find the best deals by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing at noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
You're listening to the Cashflow Ninja, the show helping people all over the world create monthly cash flow and achieve freedom today, not in 10, 20, 30, and or 40 years. This is the show where cash is not king, but cash flow is king. Now let's return to our interview.
Can you speak to the importance that mentorship played for you on your journey here too? Because I think, I've mentioned that and we've hit on it a couple of times on the show, but I think your story also really emphasizes that because you're self-taught, the hard school of knocks, right? As we speak about, but then you also found out when you wanted to elevate your game, you also seeked out people that were at the top of the game, playing at the level that you wanted to play at, to get you up there.
Yeah, no, I think it's hugely important. Like you're flogging a dead horse here right now, but in terms of the story, but I really got to a point where I had a vision of being financially free. Pick up Rich Dad Poor Dad. You need to be in the lower right hand quadrant, being a business owner or an investor, I should say. And that to me, like I moved to the United States. I bought a couple of little rental properties. I was doing a flip, but I was still working full time. It was a grind. I hadn't actually achieved financial freedom. And I really needed to up my game. And I remember a buddy of mine coming down from Canada, telling me about how he closed on a 70-unit property in Canada and how he did it with a couple of buddies and other people's money. And he had a mentor. And I said, what do you mean by a mentor? And I just sort of had to, put up or shut up in terms of I had to go out and, pay some money. And that's just the way it is. But that was an investment in my future. And now looking back, it's a very small drop in the bucket in terms of what I've created. And it just sort of helps kickstart that journey. Today that mentor he helped me kickstart the journey, but now I help mentor other people. So, the student becomes a teacher, so to speak. So very important in terms of building credibility, particularly if you want to get involved in syndication. But I think in any type of capital raising, you need that credibility that, with a team around you that have done it before, because most people were looking at me when I was like, changing my attitude on real estate investing. They're like, but aren't you a civil engineer or a structural engineer? Like I've got this thing in my head about you and I put you in a box and that's where you stay. And, that old saying that you got to tell someone 7 times before they change their aspect of how they think about you. Having that team and that mentor to ride on their coattails really, really helped solidify, the path and a very well-trodden path by many people. So I really highly recommend getting out there if you are thinking about it. You're sort of maybe at a plateau in your investing career, and you need to take that next step. Someone who is actively doing what you want to do. There's a lot of mentors out there, a lot of snake oil salesmen, but really focusing on what you want to do, where your goals are going, and then trying to find a mentor that can suit those goals. And I think that's really important for anyone seeking out a mentor at this stage.
Absolutely. And now a portfolio with over $100 million, managing that, still going around the country, looking at deals. What are you currently seeing out there? You're looking at a lot of deals. You're keeping nice and busy for just following you on social media. The one week you're in Aussie, the next week you're back in Texas looking at properties. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, mate. Look, it's my business partner and I. We had a very at the end of last year, we were definitely going in sort of 80 miles an hour in second gear. So 2019 was about changing the way in which we approach things, bringing on different folks in terms of employees and stuff like that, but also the way in which we go about our business in terms of the systems. And making sure that my business partner and I, Andrew, we're out there sort of shaking the tree to see what apples fall, and then we pass those apples on to our team to then underwrite them or whatever. But we really had a focus that at the beginning of the year, NMHC in San Diego, which is a big a national multifamily housing convention, at the end of January is really the kickoff to the season of looking for new deals. We've underwritten probably 15 to 25 deals in and around the Texas markets. And, we've been on some best and final calls, but things are definitely harder and harder to pencil. The seller's expectations are a lot higher than what we are willing to pay as the investor. Trying to really find that true value add where you can squeeze more lemon or more juice out of the lemon is really important. And just trying to find that right deal that fits our pigeonhole, because it's been tough. We're in April. We're already a quarter into the year, and I haven't closed on a deal yet. And our goal for 2019 was to do a deal a quarter. So we're still hustling, still trying to unturn every stone. But there's definitely something going on in the market, and I'm seeing with other operators as well that deals are not as plentiful as maybe they were this time last year. So yeah.
So a little bit of unrealistic seller expectations, probably looking at what people are paying for other properties, because that's one thing that I've heard guys say too, and gals, that people are overpaying for properties in certain markets. So it kind of adjusts the expectations of the sellers.
Yeah, and we're definitely looking at we're seeing that you can pay a low 5 cap for a 1980s value add product. Or I could pay a mid 5 cap for a 2000 built product where I've got less deferred maintenance. So we're definitely seeing the late 90s product, the early 2000s. We're chasing that sort of stuff. We've gone away from the 90s, 80s product because it's a very hot space. I can just get just as much value out of an early 2000s at a better cap rate. And that's just the function of the market and how frothy multifamily is right now. So as operators, we need to be very careful in with our investors' money to make sure we're putting it in an asset. We're definitely looking at longer term plays. So we're looking at the newer B+, A-, Austin type of core infill growth markets for long-term plays. We're also seeing that trying to adjust investors' expectations. So the last 2 or 3 years, a 15 to 17% IRR was pretty norm. Doubling investors' money in, say, 5 to 6 years with a 7 or 8% cash on cash return every year, that was pretty normal. Right now, we're seeing in our underwriting, and it really comes down to seller expectation, is more like 12 to 14% IRRs are penciling, with maybe a 5 to 6% cash on cash, and doubling people's money in 8 years rather than 6 years. And for us as operators, we're sort of messaging to our folks like, hey, this is still a really bloody good return. It just wasn't as high as what you're expecting it to be. And so as we go out and see better markets, better quality deals, of course, investors' returns, as our returns as operators, are going to go down. But we're also getting into safer assets, coming that were long in the tooth in the cycle. What do you want to place your money? Where do you want to put your money for the next 10 years? And we're seeing stuff like Austin, Texas is, those growth hubs, places around Houston, somewhat around Dallas, looking also in Tampa Bay, and looking at some Jacksonville, but where those real growth markets are going to be, and where we can make a good long-term play for our investors, but also trying to caliber their expectations on what they're going to get over an extended period of time. And most investors have been pretty not susceptible, but very receptive to that message as we're trying to go out and find that next deal.
Right, and you're not lowering your underwriting guidelines just because you're not trying to adjust to the market.
Right,
you've got your framework. And your list, in your checklist, basically, that you're underwriting stuff on. And maybe that's one thing that you can just touch on too in a second. But so you're not making any changes there. As you mentioned, there are deals in any market. When you guys are ready, you'll find it because you are still looking and still underwriting. It's just the nature of the beast right now that's going out there. Maybe if you want to touch on some of the you've mentioned some of the properties that you look at. What are some of the underwriting? If you want to throw out a couple of the checklists there for the listeners.
So I think the big one is the big change in 1980s assets to 1990s assets, a bit newer quality construction. We have in our portfolio. So just a bit of history on construction. In the 80s, everything was really built with 8-foot ceilings. In the mid-90s, stuff started to go to 9-foot ceilings. But one of our assets is actually a 1980s product that does have a 9-foot ceiling. And when we come in and do that turn, because we do really nice turns, it actually looks like bloody brand new construction. That extra foot really gives a sense of when the tenant walks in, I'm going to pay $150 or $200 more a month on this turn. So we're definitely looking at a newer constructed asset. So there's less skeletons in the closet, less siding issues. Typically, you're going to have individual HVAC and individual electric meters, individual water meters. From an underwriting point of view, really understanding what the story is of the seller and really identifying if it's a true value add. So there's a lot of people out there selling these deals they've done 4 units out of 300 and they've got $200 bumps. So the broker's selling it at, you can go do this across the next, the 296 of them and you can bring it up $200. And that is, to me, is a little scary if you just underwrite to that. Really looking at the rent roll, understanding the true story. What is that effective versus market rent bump or loss to lease? What are they actually getting from a renovated point of view or an unrenovated point of view, and comparing that to the market. And we're also seeing a lot of people were doing the price per square foot, but it's at the end of the day, people are, renters are still looking at what's the total check size they need to give to us as owners of the property to rent one of our units. So keeping in mind that rent per square foot is important, but also the total check balance, total check amount. So including any other additional income fees that you're putting in your underwriting. Can that market sustain that type of rent, quote unquote, all in rent? The other things we're looking at is, making sure that you're being lending assumptions. At the end of 2018, the 10-year treasury was going crazy. It was, we ended up going away from an agency note on one of our deals because bridge was actually cheaper. Agency was at like 5.25 at the end of last year, and we ended up locking it at 4.95 on a bridge, and it was more flexible. I could get out of that in 4 or 5 years rather than being locked into a 7 or a 12-year term. So looking at how your financing changes, obviously the treasury's come down a little bit. Looking at your exit assumptions. So how much are you doing on a cap rate expansion? If you're picking up an asset at 5.5 cap, what are you selling it for in 5, 6, 10 years time? Again, going back to that long-term horizon, we're starting to look at a 7 to 10-year hold rather than a 4 to 6-year hold. And making sure if that's still making really good money for your investors, educating them on those really awesome returns can just, make or break if you get a deal done this year or not. So there's sort of a handful of things that I look for when I go and underwrite a deal.
Awesome. Reed, one habit I've observed from successful people is that they always study. They're always learning. What are some of the stuff that you're studying and learning?
Oh, mate, I'm constantly learning. Studying a lot about work-life balance, about understanding the difference between priorities and goals. What is a priority in my life? Health, love, family, and business. And, over the last 2 years, I've had to readjust how, maybe in the past it was business first and then other things later. But because, I'm one of those people that always wants things to happen yesterday. But as things have changed personally for me in my life, I've really come to look at understanding and enjoying the journey. And someone said to me one time, they said, when you're 80 years old and you're talking to your grandkids, does it really matter if you have 2,000 units in 2018 or 2020? And it doesn't. And really having that perspective on life again and enjoying the journey, definitely working hard, but also play hard. I'm going on a couple of trips this year with my wife and hanging out with my family because it's important to me. Family is really important to me, and that's a priority. It's not a goal anymore. It's a priority, and that takes priority over my business. And making sure you're reevaluating what is important in your life and going out and really, trying to achieve that. Real estate investing is one vehicle that I'm achieving financial freedom and, wealth for my family in the future. But I've got to also enjoy the journey along the way. And if I can't spend it with them, having fun and all that sort of stuff, then what's the point? So really, learning about that sort of stuff, learning about meditation, learning a little bit more about business culture, developing culture within a business to motivate employees to do their best, not just have a paycheck that they're punching the clock for. So really being inspirational in that type of stuff and looking to develop my brand as well and keep going with the thought leadership platform and really throwing the 10-year horizon plan out the window and just saying, well, look, I'm going to work as hard as I can for the next 2 or 3 years, see what doors open and walk through those doors. Because, uncertainty sort of I thrive off, and I've become to know that about myself in the last couple of years, which is something I need to lean into. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. You never know what's going to happen when you go at it. Like you mentioned, doors start to open, in many different directions. And if you have a vision if you have a vision of what your life is going to look like, you've got your priorities set accordingly, then, there's going to be ample of opportunities to capitalize on.
Right. Exactly.
So fantastic stuff. Investing in the United States, the ultimate guide to U.S. real estate by Reed Goossens. Reed, where can listeners learn more about you? Where can they check out your awesome podcast? And where can they stay in touch with all of the projects that you're involved with?
Yeah, just head to www.reedgoossens.com, ReedGoossens.com. Everything is up there, the book, contact links. I've got some free downloads for anyone who wants to get over their hands on some free downloads. My podcast is up there. And if anyone is interested to grab a beer or a coffee, if they're ever coming through LA, that's where I live, hit me up at info@reedgoossens.com, and always happy to meet up and talk shop.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show again and sharing your journey and your knowledge and just providing so much value for my listeners. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Awesome time. And you're crushing it, and really, really honored to be on the show.
Life settlement investments have allowed financial and banking institutions to not only buy their equity contractually, but also diversify their capital from any economic, market, and geopolitical risk. It's been part of the billion-dollar blueprint followed by institutional investors. And if you're an accredited investor, you can also now participate in this vehicle with enormous growth potential. You can watch an informational webinar presented by one of the premier organizations providing life settlement investments, Penumbra Solutions, at cashflowninja.com/life settlements. Thank you again for joining me on the Cashflow Ninja. If you like what you hear and appreciate what we're trying to build here, please subscribe, rate, and write a review for our show on iTunes and share our show with family, friends, and your network. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can sign up for our newsletter at cashflowninja.com. I want to thank you for spending your most precious resource with me today, your time. Until next time, my friend, live a life of passion and purpose on your terms. This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. The information being presented and considered does not consider your particular financial objectives or situation, and it does not make personalized recommendations. This material is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified tax and legal advisor or other qualified professionals, and you should not use the information in place of a customized consultation with a licensed professional regarding your specific personal financial objectives, situation, and needs. We believe the information provided is reliable, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, timeliness, or completeness.